You're going to be seeing remakes of video games coming out a hell of a lot because we're at the point where we can remake games that are not even all that old and still have them look a bit better. For example,
welcome to what is ostensibly the first ever actual proper episode of Game Chroniclers. I'm Stephen Ansens, and this is my rather old friend by now, Unicom. What's up, Unicom?
I used to be young once, you know. Now I'm old to the point where I think I should probably get myself a remake or a remaster or something. You know anything about those?
I don't know if I know anything about that, but that is what we will be talking about today. Remakes, remasters, remixes, reimaginings. Do we need them? And if we do, what do we need out of them? It's a subject that's been a lot on my mind recently. So I try to stream weekly, and I generally stream older games, of course. Retro stuff, PC games. Something I talk about often on the stream is that getting older games to run on Windows 10 can be a bit of an issue. Not as much of an issue as you'd think, but it can be. Unless it has a GOG version, which makes the process much easier, although not guaranteed. There are GOG games that still don't work, still need a little bit of finagling with. It can be a bit of a process, but when you're talking about a game that is that was at least fairly big back then, hopefully you tend to find ways of making it work. However, if you also want to stream it, you generally need to use a separate type of software. In my case, I'm using OBS, which I think many a streamer does. And the thing is, the way in which OBS interacts with the gameplay footage or with the software, that's a completely different kettle of fish. So you can get the game to run on your machine, but once you start up OBS at the same time, it can get all kerfuffled. So what I tend to do generally is I look for HD mods or high resolution mods made, you know, in the past decade, because I'm talking about games from like the 90s and the early 2000s. And what I generally do, I look for these things, not necessarily to get the higher resolution per se, although that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just so that I can run them windowed, because when you run something windowed, OBS has a much easier time with just capturing the window. So that's that's something I tend to talk about a lot, because for instance, I wanted to, and you know this, we talked about this in private, I wanted to stream Seven Kingdoms, very big title in our neck of the woods, in our East European neck of the woods, but I haven't managed, like, the game runs, it's I have the GOG version, and the game does run on the machine, does run on the computer, but it does not like to interact with OBS at all. And I haven't yet managed to find anyone who did anything to it to make it to work. So I tend to talk about this a lot on my streams, and a couple of weeks ago I streamed the original Age of Empires, as in the original Age of Empires, which I installed after a CD, in a physical CD.
Never dies.
Yes, in a well, it eventually does, but hopefully we mirror it and save it digitally, sort of. But the idea is I managed to install it from a CD on Windows 10, and it works. You need to do just a slight amount of stuff to it, just working around with compatibility mode, but it runs. However, I did need to track down the HD mod for it in order to be able to stream it properly. I think that's where we start. That's where I'd like us to start our sort of discussion on whether or not we need anything. That's why I say, like, people can have different definitions for them. It's basically, you know, taking an older game, and again, we're trying to focus on games, we're not talking about any other media here. Taking an older game and doing something to it so that it can be engaged with on modern platforms. I think there is a hierarchy of things that can be considered somewhere in that realm, and the HD mods would be one of these things. But I see the HD mod as a quality of life improvement, basically.
Yeah, it's not a different release of the game.
And in my sort of mental canon narrative, I'm thinking like, okay, if this developer would have still be doing this stuff and they would have still had the legal right to their own creation, I like to think that they would have made it available to play, you know, for the entirety of their lifespan. So in my mind, it's something that the dev would have done if they would have had the opportunity to.
And in some cases, they do have that opportunity. The developer of Roll Cage, it just made the game work. The developer of Siege of Avalon, that was made by one of the developers. The updated version.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Roll Cage because I talked and covered the game. Yes, you can actually find, and I think I link it. I hope I link it in the video or in the description. Yes, one of the developers of Roll Cage, which is a dope ass car racing duel game, which again is one of those genres that kind of disappeared. One of the developers updated it so that it works on modern platforms, and not only that, but it just made it available for free. You can find it online, and it runs great.
Some developers who don't have the rights have done that. Tim Kaine has recompiled the Arcanum. He can't release it, but it's running on his PC natively in Windows 10.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one of those things. I know that as well, and that's one of those things where you know, those stories about like software development where like the coder says, well, it works on my machine. Yeah, buddy, but it doesn't have. It has to work on everyone's machine. That's the problem. That's the crux.
Has hacked Tim Kaine.
Apparently, we're not suggesting they do.
No.
We're just fantasizing here. But since you mentioned Tim Kaine and about like things that developers would have done, it's super important to know, and we know this just recently because of his vloggy sort of stuff, that whilst in Troika, they would have wanted to further patch games.
Yeah, but somebody wouldn't allow them.
But their publisher basically wouldn't allow them to do that. So that's a completely like separate sort of separate sort of discussion when it comes to this stuff. But so yeah, HD mods or high resolution mods, I wouldn't put them in the same sort of bracket as like a remake or whatever you want to call it, remaster, remake. I prefer the remix approach or the more fanciful reimagining, which would imply you do something different but based on the same stuff. So those don't really fall into that category, but are really crucial, I feel, as someone of the more advanced experience, let's call it. We don't talk about age on this channel, we talk about the experience levels. So I think it's important, as far as it is for me to actually be able to share the experience of the games, because again, you can get them to run in general on Windows 10, but sharing them through streaming, I feel it's an important sort of aspect of it. Now, moving a little bit beyond that, although we can always keep that in the discussion realm, the next level after just a simple HD resolution mod, which by the way, sometimes there are some older games that only need that. They don't need any other sort of thing that I'll talk about in a bit. For instance, the Impressions games, which I have covered all of them, basically all of the major ones. The only thing they needed was to be able to play them on a higher resolution, which actually enhanced the experience of the originals.
Better when it's zoomed out. They look immensely better. If you look at the actual remake or remaster, more of a remaster of Pharaoh, it looks like crap compared to the original run at a high resolution. They just changed the art style to something that's, in my opinion, terrible.
And that's super valid. Like, preferences, especially when it comes to aesthetics, are, you know, subjective, and that's totally fine. But especially when it comes to the Impression games, not only do you, when you can zoom out, not only can you see the entirety of your logistic chains, crucial in any city building game, but you get to appreciate the insane detail of the sprite animation even more so than if you can zoom in. Zooming in is also great. There's a couple of HD mods and a couple of games that allow you to do that. For instance, Nebuchadnezzar, which you could argue is it's a new title, but it's a tribute, it's an homage to the Impressions games, which allows you to basically also zoom in really carefully. And I enjoy the visual aesthetic of that one. It's not spritey pixel arty. It's this more hand drawn, you could call it, modeling, but it's fine. So the Impressions game do not need remakes necessarily. They still work well on their own. what they needed was this basic, I would call it currently, a quality of life improvement of being able to play them on a higher resolution. Going on a bit further, there are some older games that maybe need a little bit more than just an HD resolution mod, and maybe they need some bugs to be fixed. Not because the devs didn't think about that, just because of the time they were made in. Like, those things weren't that important, weren't, because they were generally stepping stones towards something else.
So in regards to that kind of like remake, if you will, that fixes things, that's a category of remakes remaster that I would qualify as the needed, the required. It's something that isn't just nice to have, like, you know, I made a list with a bunch of remakes on here on the second month. I categorize them like this. So remakes, which are, you know, rebuilds of the game. They don't use any of the original assets. They're basically a new interpretation of the game, like the new Final Fantasy game. It's a new thing. It's 3 games instead, well, 3 or 4, depends on how many they sell, instead of just 1. And they're completely different. They have the same story, same characters for the most part, same story. It's like, what if we made that game today with our technology, with what we know now, with what the public expects from a game like this? That's a remake. That's something new. A remaster, something like the Tomb Raider games that were just re-released, 1 through 3, I think 4 as well. Even though we had an anniversary edition of Tomb Raider 1, like 12-ish years ago or something like that. They re-released the original games, and they're as close as they could get them to the actual original. It's really something that's still needed in terms of preservation, because you want to be able to play those old games, but not everybody's going to want to play those old games like exactly how they were. So these new games add a couple of, you know, extra features, maybe optional control tweaks, maybe some graphics look a bit better, but it's still in the same style. The same thing that happened with the Monkey Island games. 1 and 2 were re-released with the original graphics. You just had them running there, and you could toggle the new graphics in at any point. But they added voices from the 3rd game, you know, the same actors from the 3rd game for the most part, and it really enhanced the game to the point where you don't need the original. You have all of the 90% of the flavor of the original, because in the remakes you don't have the music and how it flowed in the Monkey Island 2 with the IMU system, which, you know, changed the instruments depending on what part of the screen you were on. Then apart from these ones that are, you know, remakes that still let you feel the original, there's the ones that, how should I put this? We know we have them. We don't know exactly why, in terms of, you know, the game itself, the playability, the value it brings to us, but we see that the previous ones sold billions. So yes, let's remake Modern Warfare again. Like, we've had, like, Modern Warfare was released in 2009. Its remake came out a couple of years ago. No one was dying to replay the epic adventure of Mustache Commander, what's-his-face, and Soap McTavish, and the other. Nobody cared. But they re-released it. It's a different game. It's got the same name. It's a different game, and it sold bajillions. Then they did the same with Modern Warfare 2, which I'm not even sure follows the story of Modern Warfare 2, the old one. I hope it doesn't, because the old one's story sucked hard. Like, that's the point where I just abandoned the Call of Duty series, because it sucked so hard. And I think they're doing 3, or they did 3. I'm not sure. No, are they doing Black Ops now?
I don't know, because I don't follow modern stuff that much.
I think Black Ops at the 5th iteration, like they had a weird thing where Black Ops 4 was like this. That was the logo for it, like 4.
Okay.
You kind of wonder, like, shouldn't it have been like, you know, Roman numerals? No, that's tallies. Like, who counts like that?
So that for me, that looks much more like Left 4 Dead than anything else.
Yeah.
To be honest.
It was weird. Valve, by the way, they tried to remake Left 4 Dead in the new engine, in the Source 2 engine, and it was just an internal thing, but it didn't pan out.
Remakes
that are, complete rebuilds. So a think 1 or 2 years ago, we got a remake of Master of Magic. It's completely new, doesn't use any of the in-game assets. It's a completely different animal, but it's the same goddamn game. Like it's, and I said it in a good way, it's the same exact game. Absolutely. They've added DLC to it, which expands on the abilities and the characters and the features that it had. But the core game is the same thing. You will be as upset that somebody cast Crack Skull on your hero now as you would have been 20 years ago. Crack Skull, for those who don't know, is a spell that makes just makes a crack underneath your hero, and if they're not flying, they fall into it. They're not dead. You can't resurrect them because they're not dead. They're just falling, and will continue to fall for eternity. You can't teleport them back either. They're just falling constantly. It's a fun thing to have. I got a bit off track there with Master Magic again, sorry. In terms of do we need remakes? Again, it's some games we need them. We need remakes because they don't work now. We need remakes because even though they sort of work, they don't really play all that well. Like, play modern XCOM, like the ones that were released by Firaxis, and then play the old ones. The old ones have atmosphere, have a much greater depth to the gameplay, but actually playing them is a bit of a fiddly insanity at some point. You kind of wish it flowed faster.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting thing. I think I'll make a video about. I just had an idea about, like, basically why do retro games feel different than modern games. But you go.
Because control schemes back then were ill-defined and nobody knew what they were doing. They looked at a keyboard and said, okay, so I only get to use all the buttons once. What if I press shift and then use all the buttons again? Which is how you would play most space sims. The manual for the X games, which by the way are now getting a sort of a remake. The X series is, the space sims, not the X games, the ones were on MTV with Extreme Sports. They, in their manual, you basically had the entire keyboard twice, with shift, with control, with all sorts of modifiers, because you needed all of them, especially if you didn't have a joystick to actually control pitch and yaw and all the other 6 degrees of freedom movements. And it's getting a remake now in form of a DLC in the current X game, I forget what X4 is called. It's getting a DLC called something Timeless or something Time, and you get to revisit the highlights of X Beyond the Frontier, Extension, X2, and X3, and possibly Albion Conflict. Not Rebirth though, because we don't talk about Rebirth. Rebirth was it was a first attempt to streamline, to modernize the series, to remake it, remaster it, but they remastered it in the sense that they turned it into a shooter for the Xbox, where your ship can just ram into another ship and have nothing happen to it. It behaved like an FPS. It was like Doom, but with a spaceship. You had a shotgun as well, I think, at some point. Anyway, it wasn't a great game, and I was deeply used. I actually interviewed the developer about it, and I was really optimistic about it. It also leads me to another type of remake. Remaking games that were kind of bad, but maybe could have been better. Should we? There were games that had some good ideas at some point, but they got lost in the shuffle. They didn't really fulfill that. I mean, games like, I'm not sure who I'm gonna upset, but Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. I've been trying to replay it for a video for the past 3 years. At some point, you just want to kind of strangle whoever thought about implementing stairs in that game.
Those things, yeah.
You knew you didn't have pathfinding, you knew that. You can't really control your characters in real time because there's up to 4 of them and they'll do whatever the hell they want. Why put stairs in there and have them collide with each other?
Sometimes the choice of sometimes using I don't understand using stairs in a bunch of games either. They make sense from a world perspective. It's logical for buildings to have stairs or ladders, but the thing is, they tend to, like you said, the way in which the characters interact with these stairs/ladders can usually be more clusterfucky than it's worth. So you have to think, have the stairs there, just like have the stairs illustrated, but it's just a portal. Like it's just you teleport them at the end of the stairs. It's not that hard, but especially okay, nowadays it's not that hard. Nowadays Unity does that at least automatically, more or less, if you want to. Back then I imagine it was maybe a bit difficult, but you could just just avoid that part. Have it there for world building purposes, have it in your cinematics, that's totally fine. But if there's issues with pathfinding and collision detection, just don't. Just don't.
Yeah, I think they put stairs in there because it was the early days of 3D RPGs. Apart from this one, it was like I'm not even sure Dark Sun was out at that point, which was another RPG that it was actually a lot more playable than Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. But I think like the only one that comes to mind, it was 3D at that point, was Evil Island, which is in the Rage of Mages universe. So with Albion Online stuff. It's made in I think in Ukraine or Russia or Belarus or something. It's its own thing. It was big at its time. But anyway, there weren't a lot of games like that, and visually it impressed like back then. So if that were to be remade now, it would also have to impress like big time graphically if it were to maintain the tradition, or if it wanted to, like, how should I put this, break with tradition, it could just be released. This is a reference to Bloodlines too, not being released.
Again, we're not going into necessarily a news or a recent event sort of stuff. Although Bloodlines is fairly old by now, too.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it does fall into the updated to hell by the community style of not really a remake but continuously updated. Like it's getting more support than most games out there.
Oh, like Bloodlines 1, like VTMB. Yeah, no, I was gonna talk about like that is another one of these things that is like a separate sort of subsection of what I think do pretty much count are the fan mods and the fan updates, basically. Especially seeing how as
this isn't Blood, by the way.
It's not Blood, yeah.
Not a vampire,
no, not yet. Especially seeing how like we were just mentioning, titles like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, Fallout New Vegas, Temple of Elemental Evil, since we were talking about. Okay, so Fallout New Vegas is it's arguably the title that shouldn't have been in the same bucket with Bloodlines nor Temple, but it was, and hopefully you know why. But it was truly saved. Its reputation, as well as place in both gaming as well as Fallout history, has been saved by the numerous amount of patches and mods from the fans, who in a large part just like mod the looks and features of the game, but they also fix glitches and bugs and whatnot. Not to mention that Josh Sawyer actually has at a certain point released an unofficial patch for New Vegas, which in the meanwhile has been absorbed into a different mod that goes even further. These more grassroots fan directed, unofficial remakes, let's say, do a lot both for the preservation aspect, which I'm glad you touched upon, as well as for keeping a game alive, and maybe even like giving it an even bigger life after it would have normally died, which is arguably what would have happened to both New Vegas and Bloodlines if the community hadn't stepped up. Temple of Elemental Evil is just great with the patches, but it's not really in the same sort of like impact or effect of the or community size either of the previous of New Vegas or Bloodlines. When I played New Vegas and I did my 2-hour plus deep dive in it and its DLCs, the amount of modding I did to it was basically more or less was purely either slightly aesthetic, bug fixing, like general bug glitch fixing, and only mildly let's say mechanically smoothing. For instance, what I did mostly is I took the inventory looting mechanic from Fallout 4 which is there's a mod for it for Fallout New Vegas, just because it makes things so much faster than waiting to open and see and stuff like that. But so that was just my way of doing it, because I wanted to play it as close, let's say, to the original experience without having it crash on me after like 3 hours. Which, by the way, kids, the original experience of Fallout New Vegas was that it was bugged to hell and back. You would lose saves, it wouldn't save. It like for the first 6 months at least, it was a disaster. Yeah, and that's not something people talk about it today, because they weren't really alive back then to know it, more or less. But those of us who were and lived through it, we know. But again, so now it has this other it's had this other life completely because of the fans. Now there's this extra thing where there's a lot of fan content or missing content that the fan community can find in the code and can either re-implement, reactivate, or simply just put in like fan content. And that's a different yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you here for a moment. That was one of my personal realizations, that games are much more than what you see. At some point I was digging through Diablo 1's files and just found a different game there, a larger game. It was an amazing experience. And then I forget what I think it was called Nosgoth something. It was a site dedicated to Soul Reaver and Legacy of Kain, and they just showed whatever they found in the game's code, all the new regions, all the cut content, all the times the story should have ended but didn't. They just made more of it. It was the kind of experience that it kind of makes you wonder, what if you would remake the game like that? What would you give people the option to like introduce the ending here, or actually change the story that way? That would be like a weird way to remake a game, but it'll be an interesting experience, I'd say.
Could happen. Like you say, it will be really odd to implement in that sort of like choose your own adventure in that version of the game. But I think it's I think it could be doable. It depends on the amount of time and effort and expected results. But there's this other aspect of fan content which kind of goes beyond, and it goes beyond the general point of a remake or a remaster, which is what I would generally call like the reimagining area, because fans can do their own things in the games. And ever since like in the past 10 something years, a lot more games come pre-built with the possibility of modding, just to make it easier for those in their communities who are interested in this, which is just great. Not only is it cool because it can extend the life of a game, but it can also be a great creative outlet for those doing it, as well as a great learning experience for those doing it.
It's not just that, but going back to the preservation thing, because some people just love a game so much, they've brought it back to life. Diablo 1, they didn't have source code for it. A guy just reverse engineered it in his own time. It took him 1,000 hours, and he remade it. That's not something that Blizzard would have done on their own, because they didn't care that much about Diablo 1. Same with the Roller Coaster Tycoon and Transport Tycoon. They've been remade in different like free engines. Heroes as well. Heroes of Might and Magic 2. There's a free Heroes variant of the engine.
Yeah, it's called Heroes 2.
Because of the community, we're now able to play these games even without the game like itself. It's all re-implemented, it's all rebuilt, it's all with new code, but it's so close to being like not the exact term I should use, maybe variable perfect, I would say, that it's almost indistinguishable from the original, but it can be expanded upon more. It can be run on any system, like any system. You can run it on a watch, probably, if it runs Android or something.
Yeah.
The effort of the community cannot be overstated. The community has done, of each and every various game, has done wonders preserving them, bringing them back to life. They've done more than the actual companies who own the games, and if I may. Does anybody remember at one point when at BlizzCon, yeah, if, you know, at the same time when they asked us if we had phones, the Blizzard sort of said, "Hey, we're gonna remake Warcraft 3 with new cinematics, with a story that's more in line with the current version of World of Warcraft, because lore drifts over time. We add stuff to it. Some characters become more important. So why not relive that? Like, what if we made the game today? What if we made the game today with what we have now?" And everybody pre-ordered it. And then a couple of years later, we're not doing that. Sorry, what? Oh, no. Oh, we released it. We released it. Go buy it. And people bought it. And, oh, they didn't do that. Like, none of that. And that's how we got the Warcraft 3 refunded edition, which was, it was an absolutely terrible remake. To the point where the only reason that thing still exists is because they pulled the old version. Unless you have it on a disc or pirated somewhere, it's dead. It's gone. They killed it. That's the worst way to make a remake, to a remaster. It's not even a remake, it's a remaster. They updated some models and the grass kind of looks worse in my opinion. And you have a ping if you play by yourself, because of course you do. And the main menu is just a Chrome instance, because why not? It shipped with fewer features than the original.
This is this goes into the discussion of whether or not some things should be or maybe shouldn't be. There is this discussion in general in regards to other formats as well. But when it comes to games, sometimes some things are still very much playable. Like I was mentioning earlier, the Impression games. On the other hand, sometimes some things are so old and you would still kind of sort of want to play them, but the fact that they are old and in some cases pioneers of particular mechanics or genres, they're pioneers for a reason. And when I say this, I'm talking about Dune 2 especially, which I did a couple of videos on it. And the game itself you can find on myabandonware, for instance, .com, and you can run it in DOSBox. You can, if you set up DOSBox, you can run it in DOSBox and you can play it as close to as it was back then, with the absence of the actual hardware limitations necessarily, but the mechanics are linked to the hardware limitations, and that's great. And I suggest anyone interested in gaming history or RTS history to actually give that a try, to play Dune 2 in as close to an original thought of experience as possible. However, things developed quite, not necessarily drastically, but somewhat exponentially thanks to Dune 2. Dune 2 started what we call the RTS genre in general. It can be argued it started earlier with Herzog 2, and there was a title on Spectrum as well, although the real-time aspect of the Spectrum game is arguable. But we generally look at Dune 2 as the starting point of RTSs, and the reason is it sets up a lot of the base building blocks, the cement blocks as it were, the cement foundation, but there's lots of what would even in like 5 years time become general sort of features that it lacks. And when I played it, whilst I got the gist of the original experience, that made it much more difficult for me to actually enjoy the game for what it is.
You select a unit, you right click and see nothing happen.
I tried to make it clear in the video, and I want to reiterate here, like this was more or less the first title. Like there were things that literally weren't thought about yet. They were later thought about because of Dune 2. And in saying that, you can play the original and you should. However, thanks to Dune 2 being such an old game, and somewhat surprisingly, but not necessarily, it's still a title that inspires people and influences people to maybe learn how to learn the basics of making RTSs by basically rebuilding it or remaking it in different sort of open source methods. My sort of general suggestion about playing Dune 2 and actually kind of sort of enjoying your time with it a little bit would be to use something like Open Dune, which offers you the chance of playing it in like as close to original mode as possible, but you know, easier to run on modern machines without having to set up DOSBox. It also has an enhanced mode where it fixes a lot of the things, a lot of the bugs and the glitches, which again would have most likely been fixed by the devs if this wasn't necessarily like the first sort of the first sort of title in a basic sort of genre of the gaming industry, and they weren't already working on CNC by then with all of the things they had learned from Dune 2 and implementing better version of it. In some circumstances, the quality of life / high resolution mods and also kind of / fan content in some cases for games like Dune 2 are kind of necessary to make the game much more palatable, even to older adventurers such as myself and Unicom, whom we played the original way back when. But in the intervening 25-30 years, our standards changed as well, and our expectations changed as well. As the medium evolved, we evolved with the medium, we developed with the medium. So whilst it's super important, I think, from like a historical perspective, to actually play the thing in as close to an original setting as possible, ideally would be on period appropriate hardware, but that's gonna become way more difficult as time goes on. We can emulate it to a very large degree nowadays. In order to make these older experiences much more palatable, much more engageable with for current generation as well as future ones, I also feel these sort of extras, which in some circumstances modify the experience to such an extent that it's not really similar to the original one, are sort of necessary. Now there's a separation here as well, because even when it comes to Dune 2, there are Dune 2 fan remake re-implementations that actually reconstruct, sort of reimagine the game up to a point where it's not that much more close to the original experience as something like just the enhanced version of Open Dune, because they introduce a bunch of other stuff like drag selecting units, which is arguable. You could argue it's fine because it was in CNC,
but it makes you really overpowered.
Yeah, but in Dune 2, because of how things are balanced, it's a different thing. You know, like building queues and that sort of stuff. You draw your own line as to which sort of version you would want to play if you want to play Dune 2. I made a video with like, I don't know, I think 5 or 6 options of playing Dune 2. But yeah, when it comes to older games like that, I think there's a certain amount of extra things that could go into a remake that is acceptable, which isn't maybe acceptable in a game in a more for a more recent game, where the fan content or the missing content actually adds things, as you were talking about like the hidden stuff that didn't make it in, adds things to the game experience that kind of changes what that is, which is totally fine. But you're playing a different game. You need to be aware that you are playing a different game. You know, inspired by it's like a what if, maybe it's a what if situation of Dune 2 or Legacy of Kain or something like that, Diablo 1, or basically just Diablo, as we were saying. That's also an interesting and an important thing to keep in mind, because it makes me think of I've been recently playing, and I'm gonna make a video for it. I don't know if it's gonna come out before this episode or after, for like Knights and Merchants. You can still play the original sort of GOG version of it, but there's this fan remake of it where they do use the assets, but they rebuild the code, and it allows you to play on modern resolutions. It allows you to zoom out of a lot, and also to zoom in much more than the original 6040 by 480. And that's something really cool with Knights and Merchants, because the Sprite animations in that game still fascinate me to this day. I still love watching those dudes sit down at the inn and seeing their mouths do this, like actually seeing their mouths chew. That's still fascinating as hell too. They also fix a bunch of stuff with the AI, and that's with the game's AI, and that's like, again, something I feel the developers would have done if they would have had, you know, more time, more money, still control of their IP, which
the ability to add the merchants in.
Yeah, that one's a big. But on the other hand, I was thinking about that, and I'm gonna make another point about Knights and Merchants having no merchants in the upcoming video. But the point is, it would have sucked.
Issue.
It would have actually. I'm gonna talk about that. I'm gonna talk about that in the game.
Die Mine. They wanted to have it Knights and Serfs, and Serf, you know, doesn't make a lot of sense in English.
That's what I was gonna say. Like it sounds shittier if it's Knights and Serfs.
Yeah,
sounds more realistic. It's more feudal, historically accurate, but doesn't have the same thing. But it also doesn't have merchants in it, so it doesn't work. But the idea is, like for older titles that have seemingly been more or less not abandonware, because you can purchase it legally, not really cared for ware either. I don't know what the term should be. Cared for ware, like still maintained ware. And by the way, in order to play Knights and Merchants remake, as well as generally the open the DUNE mod, you do need the original files.
At least the demo for most.
Generally, at least the demo or the original file. Same goes for F Heroes 2.
And so for Settlers as well.
Yeah. So for those situations, these are remakes, but they're made by fans. And in some circumstances, like in the circumstances of Knights and Merchants, again, they tweak the AI. So things that might have worked in the original, like maybe some minor exploits here and there, or some weird behavior that you could exploit, maybe aren't as doable anymore. And which in some cases, like DUNE 2, is good, because there's a bunch of missions in DUNE that were bugged and glitched and extremely problematic to get past. So there's that, like in that sense, it does change the experience. And I think as long as you are aware of that, I think it's fine, because again, in this circumstance, if you want to, you can still just play the original version. That one still does run on Windows 10. It's gonna look exploded. Like if you have the wider screen you have, the more exploded it's gonna look, but still good, oddly enough, because just again, the animations are mind-boggling as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, speaking of bugs that got fixed in fan remakes, there was a recent release of the Dungeon Keeper re-implementation that lets you play it quite easily on modern hardware with fairly modern controls, but it's like the fixed complete version of the game, which maybe not everybody played, because here's the thing: Dungeon Keeper is shipped with a bit of a bug that caused the AI to not really do much against you. At some point, the AI just sat on its ass and let you mop the floor with it. It doesn't do that anymore in this version of the game. So it will utterly murder you at some point, which is probably not going to be the same experience that somebody had when they were playing it ages ago, and may not be a super fun experience playing it now if you're expecting it to be a relaxing dungeon game where you fight some people, you build some dungeons. Somebody's gonna come and murder you quickly if you don't act fast. It's a tightrope to walk between: do you offer the experience from the initial release or the experience that the devs wanted to give people, but they did it maybe later with a patch, or maybe there was a bug there. It depends on how you approach the idea of the game preservation in itself. It goes even to the point where when Blizzard remade Starcraft, they just have Starcraft 1 running in the background, and it basically plugs in all its responses to a new engine, but it's still Starcraft 1 running in the background. It's got the same bugs in it.
Yeah,
it's the same game.
It's a reason for why they didn't try to fix that. It's because of the competitive.
esports is based entirely on exploiting bugs in StarCraft, like with the, what am I call with the Immortal, not Immortal, the
Dragoon?
Phoenix. Yeah, you could get it to stop, like, and you could use it as a minesweeper. You move it, stop, move it, stop, move it, stop. It acts as a minesweeper. It's a superb tactic that
it can be. Yeah, so I've mentioned this in prior videos, and people don't seem to understand how much StarCraft actually started the esports industry.
Not really started, but it continued it. I mean,
Well,
Quake started. Like Quake
it
started
did.
at the big
I mean,
time,
it did, but it never reached the like the
Korea,
fever pitch.
national craze. Yeah, like StarCraft did in Korea. That's
Exactly.
or Counter-Strike around here, like Counter-Strike around here, and StarCraft around there. That's a level of esports that Halo can only dream of.
So the reason why StarCraft, the remastered StarCraft, doesn't change that is because that's an interesting sort of aspect of StarCraft, especially, but some older games, is because sometimes the bug becomes the feature. And what you were talking about is it's just like the tip of the Vespine geyser iceberg. Pathing of a lot of units has become, it's so well known that the professionals and people who spend a bit of time into it will know that the same unit will have an easier time walking up a ramp that is to the left as opposed to walking up a ramp that is to the right. The StarCraft bug to feature stuff is that it is that granular. So that's why they couldn't really fix it, because if they fixed it, they broke it.
Yeah.
Basically, that's a good example of how to update resolution size and the visuals, but without actually needing to, like, normally if it were a different game, if it were a different RTS that wasn't as crucially important to, I'm gonna say, maybe thousands if not hundreds of thousands of people's livelihoods in different parts of the planet, maybe they would have switched some stuff around.
Yeah, they would have done Warcraft 3.
Which would have been not great. The interesting thing about StarCraft going forward, the Brood War basically, is that even now, like 25 years after release, because of the super intense competitive space, especially in South Korea, not necessarily just, but especially there, like there are tournaments and stuff happening in the Americas and in Europe and in other places, tiny sort of mechanical secrets are still being discovered that allow you to use the game differently. Like the game plays differently, the units behave differently when you do some things. And the example I need to give, which is, it's an older sort of discovery, was that for the Zerg, Mutalisks were knowingly made to be uncontrollable, more or less. They would just spread out and fly randomly, even when they were grouped together. It was until someone, I don't know why exactly or when, discovered, most likely accidentally, that if you group the Mutas with an overlord, they're controllable. Again, like that's not something they coded into the game on purpose. That's just something that is it's kind of like, it's a weird form of emergent gameplay, because you use the things, the mechanics already existing in the game to do something that was not envisioned initially. So yes, so that's why if you watch or when you watch some competitive StarCraft games, Zergs, you'll notice that they don't necessarily have 12 mutas selected when they fight. They actually have 11, because the Overlord stays in the base, but the Overlord is grouped with the mutas in the control group. So, and that allows the mutas to be much more easily controlled than they would be otherwise. And
also
there's
makes some sense for in-game lore. I mean, the Overlord.
It does. It should.
Like,
yeah.
It's a brain bug. It controls those bugs, but at the same time, the shades are just blue.
And sometimes, yeah, it is. But so, and that's the type of stuff. And like, there was a recent thing that was also discovered about carriers, like a similar thing. Like if you group carriers with like a probe, they're also a bit more controllable and stuff like there's all kinds of these things that are still being discovered that you can do with the game, within the game. If you think that people have been playing the same stuff in StarCraft for the past 25 years, modern StarCraft matches have nothing in common with StarCraft matches from 10 years ago, except for
the arms race tactics and exploits.
Yeah, except for the races being the same basically. but you know, like the way in which it's played is different, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating sort of, I'm gonna say, even like it's a digital anthropological sort of phenomenon that is super fascinating to look into. But it's about StarCraft in a future episode maybe. We went through a lot of the things that I think are super important to mention in a discussion about remakes and stuff. We talked about how important community involvement is and community work via fan patches and whatnot, and how communities have literally saved games. And also we could add here how communities can bring back games through you know, crowdfunding, or bring sequels for games, or you know, spiritual sequels, which is a separate type.
Mentioning that we haven't really talked about the most important part of remaking, and that is Sony and Bethesda remastering and re-releasing games they released last year.
Yeah, we were gonna get to that. That's kind of like that's gonna be the cherry on top. Since we are who we are, I much rather us like focus on the people, not the corporations, for reasons you very well know. So we talked about the importance of the communities, which is good. We also talked about how bringing quality of life improvements to older games not only helps to preserve them, but also makes them hopefully easier to engage with by current, or you know, generations that weren't around back then and that may be in the future, which I think is great. The case-by-case nature of discussing whether or not, you know, implementing fan content or missing content does indeed change the experience, and you know, it's based on everyone's opinion and each of our personal sort of thresholds as to what's fine and what's not to consider playing the game or playing a separate game. Lightly touched on whether or not some stuff should necessarily be remade, not necessarily because it doesn't need to be remade, much like the Impressions games, but that it really shouldn't, and that's where you go in.
And some stuff should be maybe remade because it wasn't all that great, like, but it had some sparkles of ideas. I mean, the sad part is that a lot of stuff can be remade, like the rights are no one's. The No One Lives Forever, the first game, I love it. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the game is just broken, or it just doesn't exist. Like it's the poodle. You have the poodle distract the dogs. The dogs show up once because they couldn't get them to animate in time, so did you just cut them? But you have the poodle. Would a remake of that enhance things? Would it have the poodle? Would it be like recently you see the Perfect Dark trailer? I think it's a remake or something of Perfect Dark 1 or something.
I saw that, but I don't know what it's about.
It looks like Deus Ex mixed with Mirror's Edge, which
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
Sure, why not? I haven't played Perfect Dark, so I have no idea if it's true to the game, but I don't care. If it's Deus Ex mixed with Mirror's Edge, I am in. Some people like Nightdive, they thankfully they've been able to revive games. They bought licenses for them. They dug them up. They've not only remastered them, like they released them in a playable state, like they did with Shadow Man, with Turok, which they've been remade in their own engine. It's a different engine, but it looks the same. But they've remade completely from the ground up System Shock. It took them a long time. They had a few fault parts, but they just re-released it. Like it's modernized completely. It has nothing from the original's clunkiness, from the original's, you know, stuff that wasn't all that.
Yeah, the original, like looking.
It's the same one.
Needing separate buttons to look up and middle and down. It's old school. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
I'll cop to that one, but we got mouse look. We got mouse look from like a couple of years after the original system.
Thing is, they also released a remaster of the original that does implement mouse look, so it's got a remake and a remaster. So you have your choice. You can play either of them, and it's a great way to play them. I mean, for example, a not great way to play, I guess, Crysis, the remaster. Sure, the remaster of Crysis, runs so well on modern systems, unlike the first one. But it's a part of the PlayStation 3 version, which is not the original version. It has fewer levels because some of the levels didn't work on the PlayStation 3 because they couldn't get them to work. They needed better hardware.
Yeah.
So they cut.
They did the PC, you want to say? From the future.
From the future. You still need to, because Crysis was made in a time when people thought that processor speeds would keep increasing to 10 gigahertz, and they didn't. We may be getting there at some point, like finally fulfilling that dream that Intel had with Pentium 4, that it would get to 10 gigahertz like in 2004 and kill AMD. Meanwhile, AMD didn't break 2 gigahertz and killed basically Intel until the bribery happened and the $2 billion in lawsuits, which I don't think they ever paid. But
the multi-core, the multi-core aspect wasn't necessarily like foreseen in the more mainstream tech realm. I'm sure there were people who were passionate into it who were like, okay, this could work. But yeah, by the way, since you mentioned Crysis, I recently realized that Crysis falls within the temporal interval for my channel, which generally my temporal interval ends at 2010. So yeah, and also I did play. My computer somehow could run Crysis originally. It was probably on the lowest of the low stuff, but it did, and I actually did play it way back when. So yeah, that means I could technically cover Crysis.
You should, because here's the thing. Crysis ran well on most systems unless you try to run it in the extend mode on the highest setting possible. That's when things would, not necessarily run great, and you'd have game trailers saying, oh, we would give Crysis the prize for best graphics, but we spent whole week upgrading our system and still couldn't get it. So here, have it go to Uncharted, because PlayStation didn't pay us or anything like that. But anyway, you notice that Crysis still looks amazing today. Like it visually looks still better than some modern games. And
that's interesting to hear. I'm curious.
Years.
Because sometimes when you think about older games, you imagine them as you imagined them, basically, and you remember them as you imagined them, basically. So I do remember it being pretty clean and clear and whatnot. But sometimes, nostalgia goggles are a thing.
Bits of it look better than Crysis 2 in some aspects. But, it still got a remaster, a remake. But you don't see the difference in graphics from 2010 to now. You don't, because there hasn't really been a hugely noticeable one up until ray tracing. But you used to see them back in the day. That's why Resident Evil, it came out in 96. It got a remake in 2002, 6 years. It was basically a single console generation difference from PlayStation 1 to the GameCube. The difference is so striking that if you were to go on the Wikipedia page for both games, for the original and the remake, you're gonna see a small picture with the same location, and it looks extremely different. Like one of them you can see, it's a square, and then another square, and maybe something that's almost an oval, and the other one looked like it was chiseled by Michelangelo. And they're both using pre-rendered backgrounds, but one of them just looks a lot better because they had more memory to work with and more power. But it was that kind of giant leap that, yeah, let's do a remake. Let's make a remaster. Because we have something to show. Yeah. And then they went on and did remakes and remasters of the second and third game like in the last couple of years, and they're nice. They're okay. They changed some things in terms of gameplay, in terms of the mechanics of how Nemesis functions and Mr. X functions, but they're mostly good games. Capcom has really been doing well with its remasters. I'm looking forward to an Onimusha remaster, the third one especially with Jean Reno, because Jean Reno was in it, so you have to play it if they're going to launch one.
Oddly enough, I actually played that one as well. I wasn't aware Jean Reno was in it, and I don't know if I advanced very much in it, but I did play it.
Yeah, I saw an ad for it on TV. It was, I think it was on TVR1 or Pro TV. They had a trailer for it, and I just saw Jean Reno, like it was him. Like it was in the early days of using photos to actually get people's faces on things. Max Payne just came out a year or two ago. That was one of the first games that did that in a big time, where you could actually see faces that look human, like actual human. You could see hair like at the edge of their ears because that was a photo. It was astonishing. Like it was a graphical leap that we really haven't seen. Like up until ray tracing, we haven't seen something that big. There's a lot of games that I would love to see remakes of, again, mostly because they're hard to play now, and not just in terms of technical issues, but in terms of they're hard to play for various reasons. But I'd love to see remakes of the Mech Warrior games, the Mech Commander games, but you can't do that. I mean, not just because it's not sure who has the rights to them. Is it Activision? Is it Microsoft? Is it, I think Piranha Games has the rights for some the Piranha games that made Mech Warrior, not Piranha Bytes, who made Gothic. By the way. They have the same name. It's confusing. But a part of the problem with those games is also that Harmony Gold owns, the rights to distribute Macross and a bunch of mecha anime, from which Jordan Weissman, took inspiration. I'm not saying Harmony Gold is saying and has proven in court that he copied them in terms of designs.
I mean, I don't think that was necessary in a world where robot jocks exists.
Yeah, I mean, there's been allegations from William Gibson that Shadowrun basically copied everything he did, which is fair because they did, but they had a magic to it. So FOSSA used to do that, but they put out a lot of content that's actually good. So maybe stealing wasn't to our detriment as users. It wasn't, but it was to somebody else's detriment. Also, Harmony Gold are complete dicks. I mean, they are absolutely horrible in terms of the way they just want to kill everybody that even makes a robot that looks like something from Macross at all. Like
is it Macross? I always thought it was Macross.
Macross, I don't know. Arcanum, Arcanum.
I guess it depends on the dubbing and how you prefer to pronounce it. That's fair enough. But since it's from a Japanese source, it could be anything basically. Let's try to end our episodes on a positive. I wanna leave people with positive energy and vibes. Give me one or maybe three if you happen to have like older titles, because my channel is mainly focused on retro stuff, so generally from the 1990s to 2010, but you can go farther back if you have a particular preference. So give me one to three titles, let's say, that you would want to see one of the, a remake or a rehash or a reimagining of. Like it can also be what you were talking about. It can also be like, there's this game that had potential and had good ideas, and I don't want the same game. I want an enhanced version of the game. I want I want an objectively better version of the game.
Oh yeah, I've got a few. I've got a lot of few.
Well, one to three.
First and foremost, I'd like somebody to make a widescreen mod for Space Empires 5. Space Empires 5 is basically Space Empires 4 on steroids, but it runs like in a window that's this small. And it was like Malfador Machinations, who's just one guy. He decided okay, I want to make my next game 3D. All the previous games, all the previous Space Empires games were 2D, and you could stretch them out in a 2D window to fit like a 4K screen. You'd see like tiny interfaces there, but it was there. With this one, because it was his first attempt at 3D and only one, I think. I'm not sure if he's made other games. It's this small, so you have to turn down the resolution of your monitor to see anything, which is unfortunate. There's no mods for it. A remake would be nice, but to remake a Space Empires game completely when we have so many other 4X space games, maybe asking a bit too much, but an HD mod, I think that would work. My other wish is also for a game made by a single person. It's made by Veloci Games. I forget the name of the developer, but the actual person. The Game Biz series. They're the best, and I mean the best, video game developer tycoon. Virtually everybody's ripped them off. Like everybody, Game Dev Story, that thing that showed up on the Pirate Bay and got free promotion because of it. They all ripped off this guy's idea, and he made it to such a depth that none of the others really are up to that level. Like you get to design your own PCBs for your consoles. And you have to manage heat by placing the chips far away enough so that there's no heat transfer between them, but not far away enough so that the lines take too much time to actually transmit data. And that's an optional portion of the game. But they have trouble running nowadays. Like I actually bought them all from, he still sells them. Like you send the money through PayPal, he'll give you the games. You can still buy them. And they're old as hell. I think the second one's the best because the third one has so many issues running now that it's almost unplayable, unfortunately. And it's the newer one. But the second one I think was released in 2002 or something. Wow, it's been a while. And the third game, yeah, I would say MechWarrior. Like the old MechWarrior games, like they had their stories, they had their music, they had their lore, they had their style. But to play them now, maybe not so great. They don't really run as well. They're a bit fiddly to get going. Controls are again a bit fiddly. I'm hoping there's going to be a renaissance of them because, you know, MechWarrior 5's coming out and it's going to be with the clans again like I think the second one was. Hopefully we'll get to that level. And as a bonus, I do hope that at some point in the future, the people at Firefly will realize that what we really wanted from the remake, I think it's the second remake they've released of Stronghold 1, was a skirmish mode. I know we didn't have a programmer, I know we didn't have like, you know, maybe all the resources, but maybe the third time you re-release it, you add the skirmish mode, because that would have made it even more infinitely playable. That's about it, I guess, for me.
Those are good. That's an interesting. It's a varied palette, very much illustrative of your wide experience.
I would also say that I would want a remix of the old gold box D&D RPGs, but Pool of Radiance was remastered around the year 2000, and nobody liked it because it's like a worse version of the Elemental Evil.
When it comes to like the execution of stuff, that is where things can horribly break down. As far as the Pool of Radiance and the Golden, yeah, those could be remade. There is so many D&D systems, but again, like, would you want it to play in the D&D system of the time, or would you need to update it to 5?
Have it modernized with the current grappling rules.
That would create like a separation,
a schism,
in the potential customer base, I feel. Anywho,
what about you? What would you like remade?
So I've been playing basically just older games for the most of the past year plus. Maybe it's coming down to 2 years. Besides the need for like HD mods and resolution mods just to get them to stream, or also make it easier to record footage for the videos. I don't have that big of a request. What would be good, basically what keeps me from approaching this title again, is the camel by the camel of a combat system of Arcanum, since we were just mentioning it. What I would want would be a version of Arcanum that is mildly, well, not just mildly, that Tim can just put into it what he said he wanted to do, and just make it turn-based, and just make it purely turn-based in combat at least, and just rebalance everything, because that is the main thing that has kept me away from doing a deep dive into Arcanum, which is a game I deeply love on many sort of levels. But me being aware of, you know, the overpoweredness of certain magic schools, and the having to deal with combat encounters after having done it like at least a couple of times prior, I'm like, oof, like I love the lore. The lore is wonderful, and I had initially like a plan to do something, but then I got to playing Tyranny. I have the same amount of passion and love for Tyranny's lore as I do for Arcanum, and I'm not a super fan of Tyranny's combat system either. I much more prefer pure turn-based. I can deal with the real time with pause of Tyranny. because it only has 4 character parties, and you can it's more manageable. But the ideas I had for Arcanum to like go into the lore, something I transmuted into Tyranny, where I have 3 videos that currently I have, like an old review video, I have a newer, deeper review video, and I have a lore video about Kairos. And I still have plans for other lore videos, but I don't know if I'll get to them, because again, now I'm focusing much more on the older games. I would also like an enhanced version of Knights and Merchants, which is something I may or may not talk about in the video that's upcoming, or make a separate sort of video, because again,
we're just going to remove the Knights.
Maybe call it Merchants and Knights, and that just makes it completely different. That would be cool as well, but I have more thoughts about that. And you know what, something else I've been playing lately, and an old game that I feel would still work as a modern sort of release if you would update some stuff. Fantasy General. I'm not talking about, like, I know there was a sequel in 2019. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the original Fantasy General. Make it pixel art, still keep it. You can modify the map a little bit and make it look better and add some different types of systems here and there. But yeah, I think Fantasy General could also do with a bit of a reimagining, but update the pixel art to modern pixel art animation, like something more closer to an indie title I played and streamed and sort of covered called The Iron Oath. Make it something close to that, and I also think that would be pretty cool. But otherwise, I don't have a lot of I'm doing my best to play the things in as close to originally as possible, and then see what can be improved. I'm sad to hear about No One Lives Forever. That one's on my list as well. I need to see what if where can be done without that. And also, Seven Kingdoms, I would want to look into that as well, but it might be a bit iffy. There is one remake that is upcoming that is relevant to what I did, and you know it as well. There's gonna be another version of the first Broken Sword, and it remains to be seen, like, whether or not, like you said, we'll see if in this version we find out how and where Nico got that ninja suit from, or maybe where she has the skills to do that from.
I mean, she was poor in Paris, so
that's sort of upcoming. I don't think I'll play it necessarily, but I'll check it out. I'll look into it, because I already played the original and the director's cut. I'm fine for the first Broken Sword. Maybe I'll go to the second one. We'll see. There's that. What else has anything else been announced?
Yeah, there is one thing. It was revealed last week that it's not cancelled. The Sands of Time remake will come out probably in a year or two.
Okay.
But they've showed no gameplay from it, so it's probably going to get cancelled.
Oh, because, yeah, since we're talking about this, I recently saw, and I enjoyed it basically, I recently saw an ad video for a game that's going to come out soon. I think it's called Captain Blood.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a game that was announced in 2010, so it just falls into it's just at the ass end of my time interval, but no one's heard about it up until now. So basically, we're gonna have a 2010 era game, as it kind of looks and sounds like a game from 2010, but released like this year, I think, pretty sure. So that's an interesting sort of, that's a wholly different take on a remake or reimagining. It's something
that's the resurrection. That's
exactly
necromancy.
That's something that was made back then, never came out, but it's coming out now. So that I'm just gonna look at it. That's just interesting as just conceptually, just from a conceptual standpoint. That's super interesting.
It's almost as weird as the concept of a remake, where you take a modern game and then make a different version of it that's older, like
that looks older
and plays older. There's actually a famous example. I think it was Dark Void by Capcom. It was a jetpack game. Like, you ran around and had a jetpack. That was the gimmick. It was back when a game needed to have a gimmick, and that was the thing that they came up with a jetpack. You can really like fly with it constantly. You can sort of jump with it a bit. Anyway,
It's a jump pack.
yeah, the full game, the AAA game, but the 2D game was great. Like the 2D found game from ages ago, it was actually good. Like the D-make was good. It was enjoyable. The actual game, not as much.
There's a bit of this sort of retrofitting, let's say. There's this recent, relatively recent Metroidvania game I accidentally played yesterday called Bloodstained.
Oh yeah.
Which in its own, it's a Metroidvania game. So yeah.
I think it's made specifically by one of the developers of Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Yeah. It looks...
That's the Vania part of the Metroidvania series.
Yeah.
Before Symphony of the Night, they were just like side-scrolling adventure action games.
Yeah.
Like at some point, 10 years after the series started, it became that.
Yeah, so there is that. But recently, I think it got I'm gonna say it got its final sort of update, and it also has a version. You can also play a version basically of the original Castlevania, but with the Bloodstained in 2D sort of. They still look the same, but it's not 3D, it's 2D, and it's basically a recreation, a shot-by-shot recreation, let's say, of the original Castlevania with the Bloodstained sort of assets and stuff. And it's interesting. It's a weird...
Blizzard did that with Diablo 1 and Diablo 3. In January.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So there's also this, and it's nice to see this sort of, these would be again in the reimaginings sort of. You're just mishmashing things at this point in time. So it's nice to see these sort of things as well. It's a different way of both homaging and keeping the older stuff alive beyond its sort of reputation.
Remakes are basically a thing that's coming out non-stop right now, like non-stop. You're going to be seeing remakes of video games coming out a hell of a lot, because we're at the point where we can remake games that are not even all that old and still have them look a bit better. For example, Metal Gear Solid 3. It is that old. It's 2003 or 2004. No, 2005, I think. Anyway, the version that is currently being shown by Konami, unless they screw it up completely, looks good. The thing that I really appreciate about it is that it has color in it. Whereas a PlayStation 2 game like Metal Gear Solid 3, they don't really have color in it. It had shades of gray and green. Because that's what they did. And they're doing the same thing with Silent Hill 2, which is one of the best games ever made. They're remaking it. Hopefully they'll not screw it up. They're Konami, maybe they will. And it really brought up some another different discussion of, if you're gonna remake a game, maybe also offer the option of playing it like in the old style, like Monkey Island does, like Starcraft does. And there's a developer out there, I forget his name, I forget on what game he's working on. The game he's developing is a PlayStation 1 style horror action game, and he basically rebuilt Metal Gear Solid 1's intro in his engine. And his engine looks like a PlayStation 1 game, but it's not a PlayStation 1 engine. It's a modern engine that you can sort of gradually and to your preference add any effect from a modern engine. And I'm gonna send you the link if I find it, because it looks amazing. You can just add like volumetric fog to Metal Gear Solid 1, because it's not Metal Gear Solid 1, it's a remake of the game in his engine. And he's of the philosophy that that's how you should remake old games, that's how you should remaster them. Take the old aesthetics, put them in something modern, new, and then just let people go wild with how they reinterpret that in terms of their own graphic preferences. And I think it looks great. It sure looks hell of a lot better than the Grand Theft Auto remakes that they took the what was it called, nut bolt donut something. There was a logo for a donut place in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas.
Yeah, can't remember for sure.
It was like a piulita, a lug nut.
Yeah.
And they smoothed it out in the remake. It's a circle.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I have an idea what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay.
So that's my final say. I mean, That video that he showed of Metal Gear Solid 1 is just astonishing to look at.
Thank you very much for watching up until this point. Hopefully you got something out of this first episode, and ideally we get to make some more, but of course we would always prefer to get some feedback on what we do and how we do it, so make sure to leave it in the comment, and I'll do my best to answer if you have any questions, and also I'll tag Unicom if that is required. But until next time, I've been Stephen Nonsense. He's been
Unicom, I guess. It's a weird name to pronounce.
It is, but we've gotten used to it. You have a great rest of your day.